Hey Prepper Recon fans, welcome to another edition of the PrepperRecon.com podcast. Our mission is to bring you great interviews with preppers from around the globe so you can be better informed and better prepared for everything from a hurricane to the end of the world as we know it. This episode is brought to you by CampingSurvival.com. Whether your plan is to bug out or bug in, CampingSurvival.com has all of your preparedness needs, including bug-out bags, long-term storage food, water filters, gas masks, and first aid kits. Check them out online today at CampingSurvival.com. Be sure to enter coupon code PrepperRecon for a 5% discount on your entire order. Today's guest is author, economist, and creator of FTMDaily.com, Jerry Robinson. Jerry, thanks for coming on the show.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Mark.
It's a pleasure to have you, and it's absolutely our honor to have you on. Tell us what inspired you to start the Follow the Money weekly radio show.
Just the lack of understanding, I think, as we noticed a lot of the people across the country as we would speak at churches or I would speak at universities as an economist, and I noticed that there was just a lack of understanding with the Federal Reserve, with the U.S. dollar, with the currency, I think that we just saw so much, for a lack of a better term, I hate to use this word, but ignorance. We felt like we had to play a part in helping people understand what was happening. So we developed FollowTheMoneyDaily.com, and in essence what it is it's a wake-up call to Americans. We put out news, we put out radio shows, podcasts, we put out videos. We're just desperately trying to wake up Americans with whatever little time we have left so that they can prepare for whatever lies ahead.
Can you give us a brief overview of your book, Bankruptcy of Our Nation?
Yeah, Bankruptcy of Our Nation was I actually wrote the manuscript for it back in 2006, and we could not find a publisher that wanted to publish the content of the book because it was so grim and so negative. And we actually found a publisher. We actually found 5 publishers right after the big market crash in 2008. I was actually out in Denver, and I was speaking at a conference. And I got back from the flight, and I had 5 missed calls. They were all from my agent, and he said, "We have 5 book offers. I'll get you the best one." We ended up going with a good-sized publisher that put out the book. And in essence, what it says is that the U.S. dollar is a fiat currency. We explain what fiat currencies are in the book. We explain why the Petrodollar system, which I'm sure we might talk about later in the program, was at the root of the crisis. And then we also talked about some other global issues. And then later on in the book, we provided strategies. And it was interesting because the book came out in 2008, 2009, somewhere right in there, right after the crash. And it was perfect timing. It was a bestseller. And then in 2012, the publisher reapproached us and said, we'd like to do a revised and updated edition. And we said, absolutely. So we put that out. And so the latest edition just came out in August of last year. So the latest book that's out is a revised and expanded version. But, it's really all about helping people understand the problem and then take creative strategies and implement creative strategies to protect themselves from the problem. And probably the greatest issue that I've seen is helping people understand what the real problem is. For example, if I were to say that my knee hurts, and I call the doctor, and he says, "Oh, you have a broken leg then." And I say, "Now, wait a minute. You haven't even looked at my leg. You haven't x-rayed it." "Well, no, it's obvious. If your leg hurts, it must be broken." Well, see, that's the way a lot of Americans are today. They see something broken, and they just assume they know what it is. But in reality, these guys in Washington, they have very cleverly covered their tracks as to what they've done to our liberties, what they've done to our money, what they've done to our economy. And so it's really up to you and I to follow the money, so to speak, and figure out what they've done. And then once we figure out what they've done, then we know what the solution is. But until we really know what the problems are, the solutions are going to continue to elude us.
Genesis 13:2 says Abraham had become very wealthy in livestock and in silver and gold. Which current global fiat currencies have been around since the book of Genesis?
Not a single one. It's amazing. You would think that one of these guys could have got it right, all throughout history.
Right.
And there's been a lot of pretty smart guys, you would think, all throughout history. And no one can seem to come up with a currency that lasts forever. In fact, the only currency that has lasted forever is gold and silver. The Bible, as you point out, God says The gold and the silver are mine. The Bible tells us that the streets of heaven are paved with gold, and that word gold literally means gold. In fact, in the Hebrew, the word silver, kepher, is the same exact word for money. It's an interchangeable use of words. And so we don't see any fiat paper monies that have survived from that time, but we have seen gold and silver. Abraham's money is still being used and held today, just like it was back in his day. So I would say gold and silver are pretty much the only currencies that have lasted, and they're God's money, not men's.
In 1971, Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. What's been back in the dollar since then?
Nothing since 1971. Whenever we took the dollar off of the gold standard in 1971, it was because so many countries around the world, especially France and Germany, in fact, Germany just totally left the Bretton Woods institution back in 1969. And then France really began demanding a lot of its gold back because we had a gold-backed dollar, and people could either hold dollars or they could hold the gold that backed it. And whenever the United States began to overspend, they began to say, hey, okay, we want to trade these dollars for the gold. And pretty soon that demand became so strong that Nixon simply said, forget it, closed down the gold window and said, we can't do this, we'll go broke. Well, that certainly created a tremendous fear in the global economy, as people no longer needed to hold on to dollars because there was no incentive to. Now it didn't matter because the dollar was no longer good as gold. But in 1973, Nixon and Kissinger were able to work out a deal with the Saudis, and it was called the Petrodollar system. And so they were able to revive that existing demand that had been prior to this 1973 deal. And so the demand for the dollar came back, and fairly soon it picked up beyond their wildest imaginations until today, where we see that dollars are used all around the globe. In fact, just one of the big stories we just put out today was the fact that Syria is suffering from a period of great hyperinflation, primarily because many of the citizens of Syria are using the dollar in their commercial transactions and in their trade. So we see, the dollar being used virtually everywhere. And that's certainly because the fact that we have this petrodollar system in place where countries sell their oil in dollars and they receive dollars in exchange. And this just goes on all over the world. It creates a massive demand. So to give you a real brief answer to your question, what's it backed by now? Well, it's not really backed up by anything, but we do have this strange quasi-oil standard that does back up the dollar, but it's not nearly as defined as the previous gold standard was.
And what happens to the demand for the dollar if international oil trade is no longer required to settle in U.S. dollars?
Well, the demand would go down, and that's one of the primary issues that the United States has had for some time in the Middle East. It's just been breaking down for, maybe about 20 years now. And we really began sounding the alarm about this back in 2002 as we began to see this thing breaking down, especially when Saddam Hussein came out in September of 2000 and opted for the euro over dollars for all of his oil. And so we began to see a move like this. We've seen China, we've seen Russia, we've seen, of course, Iran, we've seen Brazil, we've seen India. Many of these different countries are choosing to use other stable currencies because there are other stable currencies now. And they can use things like the Chinese yuan. They can certainly use the euro. But as they begin to do this, as you mentioned, it lowers the demand. The demand for the dollar goes down. And, of course, if you drop the demand for the dollar, then you cannot maintain the excessive supply of the dollar that we have today through the quantitative easing. So it's really a recipe for disaster if we cannot continue to have countries around the world using the dollar. If that breaks down, then our permission slip to print money breaks down.
And the benchmark 10-year Treasury note touched 2.72% last week, up from 1.6% the yield in May. That's a 70% increase in 3 months. Do you expect that trend to continue, and what effect would it have on our economy if it continues?
Yeah, the 10-year Treasury yield is a very important number to watch. It's connected to many different things, including mortgage rates and several other things as well. So it's important to keep our eyes on that number and to see how it's responded over the last several months. Like you mentioned, the last 3 months, we've seen a huge skyrocketing of it. I expect that is likely going to be tamed. Certainly it's a fear that the Fed has, and they're going to do all that they can to slow it down. I think they might be able to succeed, but we will reach a place when the Fed will no longer have any control over the rates, and they will simply continue to spiral out of control. But I hesitate to say that this is the moment that they'll lose control of the 10-year rate, because they have successfully reined it in over and over and over again, and currently there's still enough demand out there for dollars and bonds, which is mind-boggling, to prevent it from exploding upwards. But anything can change overnight.
And a lot of people are waking up to these economic threats and others that are facing our country. Sometimes their first reaction is to grab the credit card, run out and buy 6 months of freeze-dried food, a massive gun collection, and several overpriced first aid kits. Is that a good idea?
Well, no, not those things that you mentioned. I mean, certainly we would like to have, it's important to have a gun. It's important to have probably multiple guns. Freeze-dried food, I don't know. I don't particularly care for that personally. However, for some people it works. What my wife and I do is we simply buy more of the food that we already buy, the things that are less perishable, and we'll buy extra of them, and we'll just simply use a great rotation method. So we always have 6 months of our food and water supplies on hand at all times, but they're not, buckets of food. Although those can taste good, and I found a few that do taste good, we just prefer to actually take the food that we already have and just buy extra of it and keep a rotation of it. Then we also have bought some of those things from Sam's, or you can buy them online at different outlets where you can buy the food that lasts for 30 years. I think it's a really great idea. Mormon canning facilities all over the country, this may surprise people, but the Mormons have public canning facilities that you can walk in off the street and you can can food for yourself, and you pay very, 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 very little. And when the way they can it, it lasts for 30 years. So we've certainly taken advantage of that. We're not Mormons. You don't have to be Mormon to walk in and take advantage of the deal they have. But I would urge people to do that as well. And as far as first aid kits and things, I think it's a really important idea to have a go bag. And that's something that we talk about in our book. And we also talk about it on our website. Our 5 levels of financial freedom is to create a go bag of all of the things that you would need in the event that something happened. Now, of course, the worst case scenario is like a nuclear attack or an EMP or something like that. But what about people who live, like I used to live in Houston, Mark, and, we always had threats of hurricanes and whatnot. And whenever a really big one would come through, you just couldn't get out of town. I mean, the highways were clogged. It was just terrible. I finally got out of the city. But when I was there, it was so important to have a go bag in the event that we had to get out of Dodge really quickly. So go bag, by your front door. It has everything in it that you would need to survive for 3 days. We have a whole list on our website, and I'm sure you talk about that quite extensively on your show anyway.
Yeah, we do. We've got a 7-step preparedness plan, and the bug out bag is one of them. They all start with a B letter word, and actually this podcast is going to be the companion podcast to our budget, which is number 2. We think that body, mind, and soul, that you need to get your try to get in shape and eat good food, and make sure you've got a relationship with God before anything else. And then that's step 1. And then step 2 is budget, and then everything else falls in line after that.
That's so good. Yeah, I love it.
And so how important do you think it is for people to make a budget and stick to it?
I think it's very important. I know it can be hard for people to live on a budget. Some people just prefer to wing it and just hope they have enough money at the end of the month. I think that it's important to sit down and see where your money goes. Even for people who have never done this, if you'll just sit down and you'll keep track of everything that you spend for a period of 30 days, I promise you'll be shocked. I promise. Unless you're just brown bagging it every day and you don't ever eat out, you don't ever stop at Starbucks, or you don't ever do anything like that, you will be surprised at the amount of money that you literally waste just to live and operate in this economy. This is a very, very expensive economy, as most people know. It's very expensive to live if you live the way that they tell you to live on TV or the billboards and the magazines. That's the big thing. What we teach people is the importance to understand that this is really just a big consumption trap, where the corporations teach us to take money out of our pockets and lay it on a conveyor belt that goes right into their pockets. And in exchange, they're giving us stuff that we can make on our own if we wanted to. So in many ways, we teach people the importance of becoming producers. That's one way to really clean up your budget, is to begin to make some of the things that you often buy. Now, a lot of things you can't. You can't make your own electricity real easily. I guess you could, but you can't make it real easily. You can't, create all of your own food. Probably you can create most of it. And a lot of the stuff takes time, and it takes money as well. So in our book and on our website, we go into pretty in-depth detail on how people can really take advantage of this idea of becoming a producer to lower their budget. I think that if people can stop spending as much money as they are on things that they don't need, they'll soon find that they can experience financial freedom. One more thing along this line, Mark, I'll just tell you my really quick story, the consumption trap story. Whenever it finally dawned on me, I was sitting on a couch, I was drinking a bottle of water, I was watching TV. It's been years ago. I remember this so clearly. And as I was sitting there watching TV, I firmly realized all of a sudden that I had absolutely positively nothing in my house that I had made. Nothing. I was thinking of the couch I'm sitting on. I have no idea where it was made. I paid hundreds of dollars for it. Bottle of water, I looked at it. I don't know where it was made. The TV, I was outsourcing my entertainment. I walked into my kitchen, looked through the cupboard. Everything was in a package. I realized, how would I survive? What would I do if everything just shut down? There was a recent study put out that showed that 2/3 of Americans would die after 2 weeks if an EMP took out the entire electrical grid. I mean, that's outrageous.
Wow.
To think that 2/3 of Americans would just die after 2 weeks, that shows you how dependent we are upon the entire food chain and upon the electricity grid and all of this. Well, I think your budget plays right into all those things, because you really need to have that moment where you wake up and you realize, what am I doing with my money? And why am I giving it away to corporations when I could be keeping it for myself and learning how to produce? So I think there's a whole lot that goes into this budget, Mark. It's not just taking the cash that you have and appropriating it properly, but it's also changing your entire mindset to realize that you don't necessarily need most of the things that you've been told you need. In fact, you can probably make do without a lot of them. So I would say that there's a lot to that.
And once you establish a good budget, what percentage of your income should be saved?
I think 15% is an absolute minimum. If you look over in China, for example, people save about 40%. And the reason is, people say, well, they must be such great savers. Well, not necessarily. I mean, the thing is that they don't have a social safety net. They don't have a social security waiting for them, whenever they, get old and can't work anymore. So they're on their own. Even though China has been trying to do things like that, it's nothing like ours. So they don't have a social safety net, therefore they have to save. And I think in many ways, the great society spending that we have seen, and of course all of the things that we saw in the wake of the Great Depression by Roosevelt when he began implementing Social Security, many of these things have really become albatrosses upon the American people's necks, because they create a false sense of security. I think people need to be saving at least 15% of their paycheck every single time. And if you can't start with 15, start with 1%. Then move it to 2%. I've talked to guys who started with 1%. And now they're at 15%. So, don't just jump right into it and hurt yourself, but slowly build it up. If 15% sounds like a whole lot.
And Malachi 3:10 says, bring the whole tithe into my storehouse, that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty, and see if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have room enough for it. What would you say to Christians who say they can't afford to tithe?
Well, when it comes to tithing and giving, I think that's just simply an attitude that we need to have. If you have to tell somebody to give, that's an obligation. And if you give because you feel like you have to, that's a law. The Bible tells us to give cheerfully, to give generously. And so, if we don't feel the need to tithe, or if we don't feel the desire to tithe, I don't think that we should become all down on ourselves necessarily, or live in, underneath great conviction. I think instead what we need to do is get into our prayer closet and ask God, why is it that I'm having a hard time letting go of 10% of the money that you're giving me? Find out what is inside. There's obviously a heart problem there, and let God reveal it to you. And let Him be the one that shows you where to give the money. Sometimes we get pressured, by whether it be well-meaning Christians or well-meaning pastors or whatever, who say you're supposed to give money to here. Well, I think it's important for men to hear from God on what He wants them to do with their money. And sometimes it takes on a very strange method. One of the things that God has told me to do over and over again, I don't know why, but when I go out and I speak, I'm inevitably at a lot of different hotels around the country. And the maids that come through, many times, they have several children, and they're many times they don't hardly make any money at all. And I love to take a 20 or a 50 or just something and just bless them, and often anonymously, just leave it in the room and let them come upon it. And I feel in many ways that is giving to God. And so I would say get along with God, find out what He wants you to do with your money. You may find out that He wants you to give away 20%, 30%. So have God tell you. He has the answer.
Great advice. How many months of income should be dedicated to an emergency fund? And do you recommend keeping those savings in dollars, other currencies, or gold and silver?
Well, the number is 6 months, and we have actually developed something called the Diversified 6-Month Liquid Savings program, which Jennifer and my wife and I started several years ago for our own selves. And in essence, what we do is we take our current annual salary. So let's say your annual salary is $30,000. You listen to this, you make $30,000 a year. That's your household income. Well, what we want to do is we want to take half of that, or $15,000. That may sound like a ton if you're only earning 30, but that's the goal. Take $15,000 and get it into liquid money. It may take you 5 years to do it, but I promise you, when you're driving down the road and you hit a flat tire, or you hit a nail and you get a flat tire, you feel so good knowing that you have, that $15,000 available to you, and you don't have to whip out the Visa, and you're not stressed out. So having 6 months liquidity, and then second of all, taking that money and actually diversifying it, as you mentioned, across 3 different areas. This is what we do. We use U.S. dollar denominated assets, usually a money market, something very liquid, very quick. We can pull it out instantly. The second thing that we do is we put it into stable foreign currency. Some of my favorites now are the Norwegian kroner. Not so crazy about the Aussie dollar or the Canadian dollar as of late. I've actually been invested in the euro for some time, and it hasn't really done me too much harm. And there are a few other currencies that we keep our eyes on. But stable foreign currencies, you can buy those through ETFs, or you can buy them through major banks. And then finally, we put the final third into gold and silver. And over a period of 10, 20, 30, 40 years, it doesn't matter how far you backtest this model always outperforms just the 3-month T-bill rate. So it certainly protects you against inflation, and that's the method that we use.
And for people living in large metropolitan areas, do you recommend trying to relocate to a more lightly populated area or to secure a bug-out location?
Yeah, we in fact have just really began hammering on this. My wife and I actually moved out of the city, Houston. It was a massive city, and we saw the writing on the wall. We said, we've got to get out of here. We've got to get out to a strategic location, and we did. And I think that it's important for people, especially if they live in the city, to at least have a safe place set up and designed and ready to go, an escape plan, so to speak. And so, yes, I think it's absolutely imperative that people have an escape plan if they live in the city. Even if it just means going out in the middle of the country and buying a itty-bitty little sliver of land for $1,000 or $500, just buying something cheap, and then taking a tent out there if you have to whenever the crap hits the fan. And just having a place to escape. You don't want to be in the middle of a city whenever riots are breaking out or when people are angry at the government. You don't want to be there. You want to have a place to go. So yes, we stress that very, very much here at our organization.
And do you expect some dramatic black swan event that we will look back on and say, that was the day the collapse happened? Or do you think we're in the collapse now and we'll just continue to see a steady decline?
That's a really tough question because for a long time, what I have said, and against all odds, I mean, we've had people come on our show and tell us exactly the opposite and all of this, but we've held to this very basic precept that it's going to be a death by 1,000 cuts to the dollar, and that's really what we've seen for the last several years. It's just been the slow, steady destruction of the U.S. dollar and of the United States credibility. However, at some point, the death blow does come, and it could be that something like this. Here's an example. You wake up in the morning and you hear, maybe it's on a Friday, evening, but you get home from work and you turn on the radio and they say, it looks like there's been a big cyber attack by China on the U.S. banking system. We're going to have to leave the banks closed on Monday. There you go. Then you have your banking holiday. And what they're tipping you off to is the fact that they don't have enough money in the system. And then everybody goes crazy on Tuesday to get their money out of the banks and they limit it. Or you wake up in the morning and you hear this news report. You hear that Saudi Arabia has decided to no longer take dollars for its oil, but instead they're going to be using Chinese yuan. Well, that would, again, be a black swan event that would negatively impact us. So those things can certainly happen. I think the United States has been very effective with its military to prevent things like that from happening. When they do tend to crop up, the United States tends to snuff it out pretty quickly. But we are now in an era where things have really gotten out of our control. We no longer have all of these nations underneath our thumb the way that we used to. They're getting renegade. They're rising. They have lots of money. They have lots of gold. And they want a seat at the table. And it's very possible that we could see a major power play like that. I mean, if you take a look at the world right now, we're definitely on the cusp of a world war. I mean, if ever, the United States has been on the cusp of a world war, it's 2013. And so I think people need to be thinking about that in all of their decisions, not operating in fear, but operating in wisdom. The Bible says that a wise man sees trouble afar off and takes precautions.
I think that's Proverbs 22:3, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I love that one. And we have links in today's show notes for the folks to purchase Bankruptcy of Our Nation. We also have a link to ftmdaily.com where you can download all of Jerry's weekly radio shows. Jerry, where else can the folks find you?
Yeah, just ftmdaily.com. I would encourage people just to go check it out. On the front page, we have really begun putting up a lot of news and news videos, so everything's fresh and current on the front page of FTM Daily on a daily basis. We work hard at that. The other thing that people can do is sign up for our free email blast. And I don't know, Mark, if you're receiving that, maybe you are, but it's a daily email blast that goes out every day, and it's filled with news that the mainstream media just won't report for whatever reason. And so I would encourage people to get a hold of that. It's a free thing that they can sign up for, and it's all at ftmdaily.com, followthemoneydaily.com.
Yeah, I am getting your email blast, and you just started doing a video edition of the email blast?
We're starting that. Yeah, we are. We're working on that. We got a camera, we got a studio now, and it's really working out well, and we're probably going to start doing some videos. But the email comes out every day, and I think for the price, it's free. It's priceless. People get a lot of great information really, really quickly through that email.
Yes, and Jerry, thanks so much for all you do to encourage and educate people every week. And thanks for making time to come on today's show.
Oh, my pleasure, Mark. Thank you, and keep up the good work.
An economic storm is headed our way. The die has been cast. We must spread the word and prepare. The coming collapse will bring a contest between tyranny and freedom. If the patriot is to prevail, we must stand as one, pledge allegiance to our God, and defend the Constitution. If you are new to prepping or would like to learn more, read our 7-step survival plan. You can find it under categories on the left-hand side of our website. Thanks for listening to the Prepper Recon podcast. God bless, and happy prepping.